Hello, I'm Josh, and today I'm going to walk through my Last of Us 2 Hillcrest liquor store basement redesign. I had a few people asking me what I did on this, so I thought it'd be fun to run through. It's going to be quite off topic, and I'm not going to really dig into any specific sounds so much more as like an overall high level vision of my approach and how I tend to approach gameplay redesigns like this. Yeah, so let's watch the full thing. So the thing I always liked about this clip and what makes me want to do it, and what I think makes it a great clip for newer people to work on and to have in your reel, is that it kind of represents like a full section that you'd have in gameplay of any game like this. Like there's the sort of slight exploration at the start, then the clip forces you to build up the tension using the ambience when nothing's really happening, and then you've got quite a juicy sort of fight to handle, but there's also not the problem of there being tons and tons of enemies to deal with and mix. But there's still more than one, so you kind of have this interesting thing where you have to manage knowing where the second enemy is while you're fighting the first one, which is something you would do in an actual game. And then you've got the kind of post-fight calm section where we go back into exploration. Yeah, so one thing I think is really important before you start before you start any Reaper project really, but specifically when it comes to gameplay redesigns, what I see people not do is spend time setting up your Reaper project in a way that lets you emulate a game, the sound of a game best. The way I do this is I sort of think of everything as if it was in Wise in a way. Like I've got my high level folder track with environment, and then the different parts within that, and then character, and then the enemies is a separate thing, and then within these there's other folder tracks, or in Wise it would be after mixers for stuff like the real world ambience bed, spot sounds, character dialogue, character weapons, character locomotion, separate folder tracks for each enemy, and then all of these are rooted all of the time into all of these reverbs. So we have one for each room in the clip, and then based on what's happening, based on where the character is and what's going on in the scene, I then automate the volume of each of these receives in here based on where the character is. So when we start in the second room here, and you can see here we only hear this reverb, and then as the character moves through the doorway, we then move to the first room reverb, which is different, bigger. Fog Convolver's just having a nightmare, right? Yeah, and then we stay there, and then as Ellie runs through this doorway, we move to this. We get a bit of the second room, and then because we're kind of in the doorway between this room and the third room, we kind of get both. Like, I mean, you get the idea, but it's sort of, these are this kind of small details I find that really help make the clip sound believable, and that's how kind of one of the parts of how you get that sort of in-engine sound, even though you're doing it on a linear timeline. And you can see here as well, I've even panned the other room's reverb to the left because the doorway is on the left of the layer here. Yeah, That's a neat little trick that I don't see people do very often with gameplay redesigns, but I think it really, really, really helps. I'll just collapse that. What else? Yes, and always take the time to go through and put in as many markers as you like for every little beat that you want to hit. So before I start one of these, I'll spend 20 minutes maybe watching the clip, sometimes with the original sound, sometimes not, but then just deciding what beats are important to hit. So here I kind of took inspiration from the original, I guess, and I've put creature grunt just as a note for myself later to maybe go back and add that if it works in my treatment of the clip. And here, like flashlight flicker, flashlight solid. So this is just a marker for what happens in the actual visual. Yeah, stuff like another creature vocal. I'd like one there. ADS here, like stands on broken tiles, like stuff that you'll kind of think of when you're doing a spotting session, but then when you're in the midst of it later, actually doing the design, you won't really, you might kind of forget or just get carried away with something else. So it's good to have this like very comprehensive marker track here, I find, to sort of keep you on track. And it's like a blueprint and a plan for what you're going to do afterwards when you actually start designing. Yeah, so I thought I'd walk us through sort of section by section. So we'll start with the environment, beds and spot sounds. So one thing I forgot to mention before that is quite important as well, I find, is to have full control over the width and stuff of your tracks. It's quite important to go into your project settings and change pan mode from stereo bands monopan to stereo pan. And then this gives you this width knob here. You can still access this without changing that. You just have to go here and click on the width here and automate it in a lane, but sometimes you'll want control over the width without having to, have a whole automation lane on the track. Yeah, so as you can see, best laid plans, sometimes your naming gets goes out the window near the end, I guess. Still mostly okay. Yeah, 4B. Yeah, so as you can see, as you heard, the ambience bed's here. There's not really that much crazy going on. It's just stuff that, sets the vibe of the scene. This is some like ancient, like pre-outbreak, like dingy basement. There's all the kind of spore stuff on the walls, the pipes are falling to bits. Yeah, so just, something that kind of represents that. But then I think where you really get, well, actually, first of all, it's super important that these change when the character goes from room to room. So you'll hear a slight change here when we go into this room, but we still keep some of the previous character. And then one neat trick that I like to do as well is sort of when the camera starts in the scene, and that drone starts. So like imagine this drone is left channel's hard left, right channel's hard right. Then I like to keep track of the camera movement as the clip progresses, and then automate the width of the stereo bed based on that camera movement. So let's say that this is, let's just, if we call this our default position, so we're facing forward. Then we see the camera sort of here goes to the left. At that point, I would start. It's not super scientific, but I would just start altering the width on the bed to kind of simulate that thing that you hear quite often in games where the bed will rotate around the listener as the character turns to give more of a sense of a 3D space. So just like it's a way to just emulate that within Reaper, which is a subtle thing that adds up to the whole of making your redesign clip sound like it was actually in a game. Then I imagine so it would be kind of default stereo here, but then as the character turns and runs out of this room, at this point it would be kind of -75 width, so we've kind of flipped the stereo image because Ellie was facing to the right of the screen at the start, but now she's facing more to the left, and we kind of represent that in the sound. That's one way to help make the scene feel 3D when it's a gameplay redesign. But obviously, most importantly, is the spot sounds, and just these are super important. So stuff like that pipe creak on the right. Yeah, it's really important as well to kind of, if you wanted to sound like a game, start managing the volume of each object and managing the panning of each object as if it was in a game as well. So you'll see quite a lot of detailed. One sec, let me just expand this. This becomes a bit of a nightmare when you've got so many. Yeah, you see quite a lot of detailed panning automation here. And that's just to kind of me looking at the clip as if it was a game and trying to kind of emulate what Wise itself would do. Yeah, and the end result is like, if you're detailed enough with your panning and careful enough with the tracking the camera perspective and stuff, you can really get that kind of it feeling like it's an object in the space. Yeah, I think that's probably all for that. Let's move on to I like to call them environmental reactions, and this is like stuff that doesn't quite warrant being a sound effect itself and having its own category and stuff, but it's like an ambience, like an ambient event, but it's caused by something a player or an enemy does. So this is stuff like when the player fires a weapon and some dust falls from the ceiling, or they fire a high-powered weapon next to some metal shelves, and it kind of like rattles the contents of the shelves a bit, that kind of thing. So yeah, let's watch that now. So yeah, as you can hear, that stuff kind of sounds slightly out of place and a bit janky when it's just soloed like that, but when it's part of the wider mix, it's a subtle thing, but it adds quite a lot of believability, I think. Yeah, as you can see, I've split it here into environmental reactions, light verb and heavy verb. So this is just as the same with all the other sounds, like spot sounds. You should account the positioning and especially the distance when it comes to trying to sell the believability. Yeah, so the light stuff tends to be stuff that's closer to the camera, like this desk vibrating when we fire the shotgun, and the heavy verb is for more like the pipes in the distance being disturbed, or the dust falling from the door frame when someone walks through it. Yeah. Yeah, that's that on that, I think. And quickly just to show you the horror bed stuff, which is non-diegetic, but is used to kind of really sell this tension section. Cool. So now let's take a look at the player Foley and dialogue and all the weapon sounds.
Fuck off! Fucker! How do I get out of here?
You'll have noticed by now that I have just used the actual Ellie efforts and dialogue from the game itself, which I just ripped off of YouTube, which some people might have a problem with, but I mean, personally, if I heard that in someone's reel, I wouldn't. I mean, as a sound designer on a AAA game, you're not really going to be the person in charge of recording and editing and mixing and voice designing a character like that. So to have the assets ready to go for the purposes of a redesign, I really don't see the problem with. You still have to, you know, select the right ones, time them correctly, make them sound believable, all that stuff. You know, just because you've ripped them off YouTube doesn't mean it'll sound good. Yeah, there's my thoughts on that. I think we'll take a look at the dialogue and the locomotion, so the Foley and the footsteps first.
Fuck off! Oh! Fucker! How do I get out of here?
Hey, so yeah, the one thing with footsteps and gameplay redesigns, it is always an absolute nightmare to sync them properly. It's just something that you just have to take the time to do. Yeah. But there's a few things to bear in mind, I find, when you're doing this. Is just like, it is quite time consuming and you are doing the same thing a lot, but you can really have a lot of fun with making it super, super detailed. Like, I like to get into thinking about things like, you know, which foot the character's weight would be on. So when they push off on that foot, there's more of a scuff from that one. You know, maybe it kicks some debris across the floor, like bits of dust or like, you know, chunks of glass or something. And, you know, kind of like also look at like the character's like inventory, I guess, like what they're holding. So, you know, she's kind of got more stuff on the right side of her body. She's holding the gun primarily in her right hand, so those footsteps will be that little bit more powerful compared to the left. Yeah, what else have I got? And yeah, just go for the Foley. Just, it's really important to go to a lot of detail, even if you might not consciously hear it in the final mix. It being there, for one, if you want to hear it, it's already there, and because you did it on your Foley pass, and you can easily turn it up. But it just kind of adds to this whole feeling of the character being an object in the space. You know, for instance, like you can hear the arrows rattling in a backpack. It sort of gives a bit of personality to the character. I think I was working on this while streaming to someone on Discord as well, and they were like, you should have the sound of the leather strap on the shotgun flapping around, and I was like, we'll never hear that, but it was fun to do, and you actually can hear it a little bit in a couple of places in the quiet part before, and it kind of adds something. So yeah, like it can be a bit boring, but personally I think it's really fun once you get into doing the Foley, and you can really go to town with it. Yeah. I think what else I do. Yeah, so one of my other little tricks I like to do is to sort of duck the volume of the breathing and any efforts slightly when they coincide with a particularly heavy footstep or something like that. So you get this kind of, it's super subtle, but you get this effect of when Ellie starts to run away from the bloater, or the shambler, you can kind of hear that her footsteps dig into the breathing sound slightly. Again, it's just another thing that makes the character feel like a cohesive object in the scene rather than, you know, just a collection of sounds playing back. And some parts, I think I did all the efforts like kind of after I'd done the creature sounds and stuff like that. So I think in some places there's just no breathing, but that's because I knew by that point that it would be completely inaudible in the mix, so it just wasn't worth adding. Yeah, I guess that's that for Foley and breathing. Yeah, and just make sure that your palette is consistent for the Foley sounds. Like I decided before I started track laying her Foley and her footsteps, I kind of decided on I made like a sound library just for this little part, like a personal folder in Media Explorer, that, you know, was all Foley sounds, like cloth movements and stuff that I felt like they were from the same piece of clothing. So you don't suddenly have the start of the clip, you know, you're doing the Foley and you've chosen all cloth stuff, and then the next section you kind of leave it a day and you kind of, you know, find a really cool sounding one that fits really well, but it happens to be leather, and, you know, it works on a surface level, but when you compare the Foley at the start of the clip and the end of the clip, you know, listeners will pick up on these little tiny inconsistencies, and they might not know what's wrong, but they'll kind of, it'll take something away from the clip. Yeah, I think I'm done rambling about Foley. Let's go on to weapons. I'm by no means a Foley expert at all either. This is just kind of what works for me with clips like this. Yeah. Yeah, let's check out the weapons. Yeah, I'm not going to really dig too much into the actual design of the weapon sounds, but just a tip that helped me when I'm doing redesigns like this is to do the actual gunshot design in a separate project and then bring it in as a single WAV file. So yeah, you can see that this is the session where I actually made the sound. Then I kind of design it and then bounce it out and bring it, bounce each one out, each of these variations as a single WAV, and then bring it into the session. So that way you're keeping all of the complexity of the design and all the plugin load and stuff out of the main track lane session, and you're keeping it in here. And then if you want to go back and make any changes to the gunshot sound, you can do it in here and then just overwrite the source file that's used in here. I'll show you the shotgun in isolation. You can see I've even baked in the shell drop. Yeah, and then for some reason I've taken the tail out of this one. Yeah, I think that was the tail end of that one was causing some trouble with the mix or something. So as a quick fix, I went in here and pushed that element down and made it mono in there, and then overwrote it in here. Yeah. Digging deeper here. And yeah, sometimes you might find that the reverb that you're using for everything else in the scene, the ones that we set up at the start, doesn't quite work when you use it on a weapon or something like that, because they're such transient, broadband noisy things that they'll excite the reverb in a way that Foley and ambience and spot sounds and stuff won't. So I think I've got a separate reverb here for the shotgun that it doesn't kind of follow the same rule of rooms that I mentioned at the start. It's just like the shotgun always has this reverb on it because it suits the shotgun better. Yeah, don't be afraid to break your own rules if there's a reason and you know why. Yeah, I think. See if there's anything to dig into in the weapon Foley that I missed before. This is the leather strap thing I was talking about before. Yeah. Yeah, like that's barely even perceptible. Flashlight stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess let's move on to the enemies. I guess let's take a look at let's take a look just at the whole thing, and then I'll talk through some things afterwards. Yeah, I'm not really going to dig into the actual creature design with this. I might do in a later video. There's far better creature sound design videos out there than anything I could do from this clip. So go check those out. One thing that the enemies needed in this clip, though, was what actually sells them, I think, more than the sound design itself, which I kind of just got lucky with the source, and like it all kind of clicked in a way. But one thing that did take a lot of work was getting the feel of distance right, and the panning and the sort of occlusion of them over distance and that kind of thing. So you can see here what I do with the enemies here is I'm automating the pan, the width, the trim volume, and most importantly the I've got an EQ on bloater 1 and bloater 2, so each of the enemies have their own folder track for all of their sounds. I'm kind of watching the clip and then kind of painstakingly and meticulously adjusting the EQ on each of them. So like when this guy here comes through the doorway, you hear their sort of distant screams and stuff suddenly become a lot closer, and that really helps to make the clip a lot more believable. You can see here the sort of meticulous panning, and then there's an EQ here that it kind of looks ridiculous when he sort of he's still quite muffled here, and then he comes through the doorway, and then he rolls off quite a bit more until he's in full sight here, and we're pretty much, there's not much EQing going on. Meanwhile, the second person, let's have a look. Might be the wrong one. There's a lot of EQ automation going on, basically. Here I'm trying to emulate what would kind of not automatically, but what would happen in Wise if you had all of your occlusion set up properly in the game engine and you had all your values tuned correctly, and yeah. I'm also increasing reverb sends when the creatures are really far away as well, just to kind of sell that kind of abandoned, desolate basement feel. Yeah, I guess if you take anything away from this whole video, is you're doing a gameplay redesign, do not underestimate how much better it can sound if you really take the time to automate your panning correctly, automate your width correctly, automate EQs correctly to simulate occlusion. Yeah, just treat it like it's a game, basically, I guess, is you're doing a gameplay redesign. My phone. You're doing a gameplay redesign, so try and make it sound like a game, and these are the tools that help me do that. So yeah, same thing with the explosions as well. They were designed in a separate Wise project here. Separate Reaper project. Dig into them a little bit. So we've got, what have we got? Yeah, a ton of stuff. Some gravel tail. That's some tiny excerpt from a designed water explosion. I just like the texture. It's a velociraptor. What are these ones? Guessing these are more kind of gravelly impacts. Yeah. That is some like super distorted impact. Another rock impact. Bunch of stuff through FabFilter. I guess that's like the sort of tail end of some explosion that had some debris in it that I liked. And then I think this is some like a flamethrower burst or a firework explosion. Yeah, it's just kind of carefully chosen source, and then the result is, oh, not that. It is this. Yeah. I guess what I was saying with the fake the occlusion and stuff is probably most apparent on the when the second bloater runs around the corridor after you've run away from them. Runs through the corridor once you've run away from them. So here. Yeah. It kind of helps add that drama, because like, I think at that point I've kind of, the creature's very wide, it's very reverby, it's not clear at all where it's really coming from, and that's kind of part of the scare. And then the moment it comes around the corridor, you hear it comes around the corridor and through the doorway, you kind of hear it suddenly like laser focus, and it makes it quite dramatic at that moment to suddenly have this thing in front of you and it be crystal clear exactly where it is. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to one thing on the ambience that I missed at the very start, I realized. I can't remember who taught me this, but on the ambiences, to help, like, give that sense that the player's moving through the space as well, it can be nice to add, particularly in quite spooky scenes like this, or like really sci-fi things, like a subtle like whoop when the player walks or runs through a doorway into a new room. So I think you hear that when we... Hang on, let me... There. Not so much there. Is it a spot sound? But I guess the big, pipe creak thing announces that we've arrived in that room, but then when we run through this door... Is it in the reactions? Yeah, maybe, yeah, that was the idea with that environmental reaction sound there, but yeah. I think I did that and then massively toned it down, but it has worked for me in the past. But yeah, the player kind of runs through the door and there's like a yeah. I think I buried it right in the mix at the end because it wasn't working in this particular clip, but still, like we've got when Ellie runs through that door, the idea is she kind of disturbs the dust and debris sitting on top of the door frame when she runs through, and then we get this kind of yeah. And one more thing, once you've kind of you're in the mixing phase, it always tends to turn out better. I find if you kind of want to, unless you need to go in and change a specific sound or whatever, to try and do a lot of your mixing on the sort of the highest level. I like to add these trim volume envelopes and sort of do it there instead of digging into it. Sometimes you need to, but often at this point you're not balancing individual sounds against one another. You're more just choreographing the overall balance of things over the scope of the whole clip. As you can see here, like from the start, the ambient starts out at +4, and then I think it's over the course of the tension build-up, it drops slightly, and that's probably to make room for the creatures. And then I think during this sort of section where she runs away from the second one, there's the ambience dips right down for a split second while Ellie doesn't know where the enemy is. That's to emphasize the sound of the creature, and then once so I guess it's kind of like like she's in like listen mode or something almost, but not actually doing it. And then when the creature comes around the corner, we kind of snap back to reality. There's a threat, and the ambience comes back properly. So what I'm saying is really you can there's a story in every sound in the clip. Like you have the sort of slow reveal of the bloater through the door frame, and then it starts the fight. That's a little story in itself. There's like on the super micro scale, there's like the story of like the flashlight starting to flicker and Ellie presses something and sorts it out. But you also can discover extra stories to tell in the mixing phase, like that. That wasn't really planned before, but when I was mixing it, I discovered, if during this section, I just had an idea, and if I figured out that if I drop the volume of all the ambience at that point, then it creates its own little story here where we kind of imagine she's listening more intently to the enemies because of the situation. Yeah, so take the time to carefully mix the clip, because you can also add drama at this stage as well. You're not limited to you don't create it all during the design phase. Yeah. I think that's quite rare. This one's at the highest level, this trim volume, but if we dig into each of these kind of high level folder tracks, we'll have its own trim volume set up, and we'll be manually adjusting the the volume of that over the whole clip. Yeah. Definitely some stuff I've done that I wanted to talk about that I've forgotten about. No, I think that's it. Yeah, thanks for watching. If I'll play the full clip again at the end as well. If I've forgotten something that you can see or hear I've done but I didn't talk about, please get in contact. Or if I explained something terribly, which is quite possible, feel free to send me a message and I'll get back to you and try and clarify. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful, and see you later.